The grand chandelier of Hampton Mansion glitters like 1,000 stars, but the laughter echoing through the hall is cold and vicious. Emily Harper, a humble housekeeper, steps down the marble staircase in a breathtaking gown, her heart pounding. The elite of the Hamptons sneer, their champagne glasses raised in mockery. "Look who dared to show up," billionaire James Caldwell scoffs, his voice dripping with cruelty. This was his cruel joke, an invitation to humiliate her. But what these smug tycoons don't know is that Emily's about to unveil a secret that will shatter their world forever. Stay tuned for the shock of a lifetime. The Hampton Mansion looms like a fortress of wealth, its towering columns and polished marble floors a testament to the Caldwell dynasty's iron grip on New York's elite. For 3 years, Emily Harper, 32, has toiled here as a housekeeper, her presence as unnoticed as the dust she sweeps away. She moves silently through gilded halls, her worn sneakers a stark contrast to the diamond-encrusted heels of the guests who treat her like part of the furniture. But Emily's eyes miss nothing: the whispered deals, the fake smiles, the cruelty cloaked in couture. She knows the mansion's secrets, and they burn in her chest like a smoldering ember. James Caldwell, 45, rules this empire with a smirk and a checkbook. A billionaire with a reputation for crushing rivals, he hosts lavish galas to flaunt his power, his tailored suits as sharp as his tongue. To him, Emily is a pawn, a nobody to be toyed with for amusement. 3 days ago, he sauntered into the servants' quarters, his entourage trailing like vultures. "Emily," he drawled, tossing a gold-embossed invitation onto her cleaning cart, "we're throwing a charity gala. Black tie, maximum elegance." His friends snickered, their eyes glinting with malice. "You've got something to wear, don't you?" The words were a dagger meant to wound. It was no invitation, it was a trap, a public stage to parade her as a fool before the Hamptons' high society. Behind closed doors, James made a bet with his wife, Sarah, as Emily scrubbed the floors nearby. 10 grand says she won't show, he chuckled, sipping bourbon. "If she does, she'll be the night's entertainment." Sarah's laugh was sharp, her manicured nails tapping the table. "She'll crumble in 10 minutes, James. Poor thing doesn't belong." But what James doesn't know is that Emily's past is a locked vault, and the gala is her key. She's no stranger to these halls, not as a servant, but as someone born to them. As she clutches the invitation, her fingers trace the embossed crest, a symbol of a legacy stolen from her long ago. Tonight, she won't just attend the gala, she'll unravel the empire James built on lies. Emily Harper stood alone in her cramped studio apartment, the gold-embossed invitation from James Caldwell pinned to a corkboard like a battle plan. The Hamptons' glittering gala was hours away, and the weight of her decision pressed against her chest. She knew James's game: a public shaming dressed up as charity, a chance to cement his dominance by parading her as a laughingstock. But Emily wasn't the broken girl he imagined. Her resolve hardened like steel, forged in a past she'd buried deep, a past James would regret unearthing. She knelt beside an old cedar chest, its hinges creaking as she lifted the lid. Inside lay her mother's legacy, a shimmering emerald gown, its silk threads whispering of a time when Emily's family stood among the elite. Her mother, Clara Harper, had been a celebrated pianist, her melodies enchanting the very halls Emily now cleaned. But Clara's love for William Caldwell, James's father, had been a secret that cost them everything. When Clara died, Emily was just 12, stripped of her inheritance and cast into a world that saw her as nothing. The gown was all that remained, a relic of a life stolen. As Emily ran her fingers over the fabric, her heart raced, not with fear but with purpose. Tucked beneath the gown was a sapphire locket, its intricate Caldwell crest glinting in the dim light. It was her mother's, a gift from William, proof of a bond James had erased. Emily clasped it around her neck, the cold metal grounding her. She wasn't just going to the gala, she was reclaiming her place. But the stakes were higher than she'd let herself admit. That morning, James had cornered her in the mansion's wine cellar, his voice low and venomous. "Show up tonight, Emily, and I'll make sure you're scrubbing floors for the rest of your life," he hissed, his breath hot with bourbon. "You're nothing but a stain on my family's name." His threat lingered like smoke, but it only fueled her fire. She'd seen James ruin lives, employees fired on whims, rivals bankrupted with a phone call. He thought he could break her, but he'd miscalculated. Emily stood before a cracked mirror, the gown hugging her frame like armor. She wasn't the timid housekeeper James mocked. She was Clara's daughter, William's heir, a woman who'd survived loss and betrayal. Her reflection stared back, eyes blazing with defiance. She recalled her mother's words: "Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's walking through it." Tonight, she'd walk through James's trap and turn it against him. Her plan was meticulous. She'd use the gala spotlight to expose his lies, but one wrong move could destroy her. James had the press in his pocket, the guests in his thrall. Yet Emily had something he didn't: truth and the will to wield it. As she slipped the locket into her clutch, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number: "Don't do this. You'll lose everything." Her pulse spiked. Was it James? One of his cronies? She deleted it, her jaw set. The gala wasn't just a stage for humiliation, it was her battlefield. Emily stepped into the night, the locket heavy against her heart, ready to face the man who'd stolen her legacy and dared to call her nothing. The Hamptons' night buzzed with opulence as Emily Harper stepped from the shadows of a hired sedan, her emerald gown catching the moonlight like a beacon. The grand entrance to Hampton Mansion loomed ahead, its double doors flanked by velvet ropes and security guards in crisp tuxedos. Her heart thundered, not from fear but from the weight of what lay beyond those doors, a room full of vipers waiting to strike. James Caldwell's gala was no mere party, it was a coliseum, and Emily was the gladiator he'd thrown to the lions for sport. She clutched her sapphire locket, its cool surface anchoring her resolve. This was no longer about surviving his cruelty, it was about turning his stage into her reckoning. Inside, the ballroom pulsed with excess. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over tables laden with caviar and vintage champagne. The air thrummed with the chatter of New York's elite, hedge fund tycoons, fashion moguls, and politicians, all draped in designer finery. Emily's arrival sliced through the noise like a blade. Heads turned, conversations faltered, and a ripple of whispers spread as she crossed the threshold. Her gown, elegant and timeless, hugged her frame with a grace that defied her station. For a moment, she was not the housekeeper they'd ignored but a vision that unsettled their carefully curated world. James Caldwell stood at the center of the room, a king holding court. His tailored suit gleamed under the lights, his smile a polished weapon. He spotted Emily and raised a glass of Dom Perignon, his voice booming over the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, a special guest," he announced, his tone laced with mockery. "Our very own housekeeper, Emily Harper, gracing us with her presence." Laughter erupted, sharp and cruel, a wave of derision that crashed against her. Cell phones flashed, capturing the moment for social media vultures eager to feast on her humiliation. Claire Winston, an oil heiress with a diamond choker glinting at her throat, leaned toward her friend Lauren Pierce, wife of a prominent senator. Did she raid a thrift store for that dress? Claire sneered, loud enough for Emily to hear. Lauren's laugh was nasal, her eyes raking Emily with disdain. She's delusional if she thinks she belongs here. The crowd parted as James sauntered toward Emily, his entourage trailing like hyenas. He stopped inches from her, his breath carrying the faint tang of bourbon. "Emily, I'm impressed," he said, his voice dripping with false admiration. "You actually showed up. But let's be honest, this isn't your world." The words were a gauntlet, meant to crush her spirit before the eyes of the elite. Guests closed in, their smirks a gallery of privilege. A young influencer, phone raised, narrated to her followers, "This is peak cringe, housekeeper crashes gala." The room felt like a pressure cooker, every laugh and whisper tightening the screws. But Emily didn't flinch. She stood tall, her posture regal, her gaze locked on James with an intensity that made his smirk flicker. The sapphire locket gleamed at her throat, a silent promise of the storm she'd unleash. She'd spent years invisible, scrubbing their floors, swallowing their slights. Tonight she was done hiding. "My world?" she repeated, her voice soft but laced with steel, cutting through the din. The crowd hushed, sensing a shift. James's eyes narrowed, a flicker of unease crossing his face. He'd expected tears, a hasty retreat. Instead, Emily's calm defiance was a crack in his carefully constructed narrative. Claire Winston stepped forward, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "Sweetie, that dress doesn't fool anyone," she said, her voice syrupy with venom. "You're still the help." The crowd tittered, emboldened by her cruelty. Lauren Pierce chimed in, twirling a strand of pearls. "Maybe she's hoping for a Cinderella moment. Sorry, no prince here." Their words were darts, but Emily's expression remained serene, her lips curving into a faint, dangerous smile. She let the insults hang in the air, her silence more powerful than their noise. The guests shifted uncomfortably, their laughter losing its edge. Something about Emily's poise, the way she occupied the space, unbowed, felt wrong, like a predator masquerading as prey. James sensed the mood slipping and clapped his hands, redirecting attention. "Let's raise a toast," he declared, his voice overly bright. to charity, and to Emily for giving us such entertainment." The crowd obliged, glasses clinking, but the energy had shifted. Emily's presence was a puzzle they couldn't solve, a threat they hadn't anticipated. She took a step forward, her gown rustling, and the room seemed to hold its breath. "Entertainment?" she said, her voice clear, carrying to every corner. "Oh, James, the real show hasn't even started." Her words hung like a guillotine, and for the first time James's confident facade cracked, his hand tightening around his glass. The gala was no longer his, it was hers. The air in the Hampton Mansion's ballroom crackled with tension, the crowd's laughter fading into an uneasy murmur as Emily Harper's words hung like a storm cloud. "The real show hasn't even started," she'd said, her voice a velvet blade slicing through James Caldwell's smug toast. The billionaire's grip on his champagne flute tightened, his knuckles whitening as he forced a chuckle, but the room wasn't his anymore. Emily stood at the center, her emerald gown shimmering under the chandeliers, the sapphire locket at her throat pulsing with unspoken secrets. The elite of the Hamptons, Claire Winston, Lauren Pierce and their ilk, watched with a mix of scorn and curiosity, their phones still raised, but now hesitant, as if sensing a shift in the script James had written. James stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking on the marble floor, his smile a brittle mask. "Emily, don't embarrass yourself further," he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear, his tone patronizing. "You're out of your depth. Go back to your mop." The words were meant to reassert his dominance, to remind everyone of the hierarchy he ruled. A few guests snickered, but the sound was hollow, lacking the venom of before. Emily's unflinching gaze, steady, piercing, made them falter. She tilted her head slightly, her lips curving into a smile that was neither submissive nor nervous, but something else entirely, dangerous, like a predator toying with prey. "Out of my depth?" Emily repeated, her voice soft but resonant, carrying a weight that silenced the room. She took a deliberate step toward James, her gown rustling like a whisper of defiance. "Or is it you, James, who's afraid of what's coming?" The question landed like a grenade, its implications rippling through the crowd. Claire Winston, clutching her diamond choker, whispered to Lauren Pierce, "What's she playing at?" Lauren's eyes darted to James, her pearls suddenly feeling too tight. The influencer filming nearby zoomed in, her live feed buzzing with comments. "Who is she? This is getting wild." James's jaw clenched, his composure fraying. He'd orchestrated this gala to crush Emily, to parade her as a fool before the Hamptons elite, but her poise was unraveling his plan. "You're delusional," he snapped, his voice sharper now, betraying a flicker of panic. "This is my world, not yours." He gestured to the opulent ballroom, the guests, the power he wielded. But Emily didn't blink. She raised a hand, her sapphire locket catching the light, and spoke with a calm that sent a chill through the room. "Your world? Funny, because this gown, my mother's gown, was worn in rooms like this long before you learned to buy your way in." The crowd gasped, the revelation a spark in dry grass. Claire scoffed, trying to regain control. "Your mother? What, some wannabe socialite?" Her voice dripped with disdain, but it trembled at the edges. Emily turned to her, her smile sharpening. Clara Harper wasn't a wannabe Claire. She was a star, a pianist who played for presidents and kings. This gown carried her music through halls you'll never grace. The words were a slap, and Claire recoiled, her face flushing as whispers spread. Lauren leaned in, her voice low but audible. "She's lying. No way a housekeeper's mother was that Clara Harper." But doubt crept into her tone, and the crowd's certainty wavered. Emily's eyes returned to James, who was visibly rattled, his hand twitching as if itching to silence her. "Clara Harper," she continued, her voice steady but laced with fire, "knew the Caldwell family better than anyone. She knew their secrets, their betrayals. And so do I." The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in on James as Emily's words wove a net he couldn't escape. He forced a laugh, but it was strained, almost desperate. "Secrets? You're grasping at straws, Emily. This is pathetic." Yet his eyes betrayed him, darting to the exits, calculating his next move. She took another step forward, closing the distance between them, her presence commanding the space. "Pathetic?" she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet every guest hung on her words. "What's pathetic is thinking you could erase the truth forever. I belong here, James, not because of your invitation, but because of my blood." The crowd froze, the word blood echoing like a gunshot. James's face paled, his glass slipping slightly in his hand. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, but his voice cracked, betraying the fear he couldn't hide. Emily's smile widened, a glint of triumph in her eyes. "Oh, you'll see," she said, her tone laced with a promise that made the hairs on the guest's neck stand on end. I'm not here to play your game, James. I'm here to end it. The room erupted in murmurs, phones capturing every second. As the elite realized they weren't watching a humiliation, they were witnessing the prelude to a reckoning. Emily's words had planted a seed of doubt, one that would soon bloom into a truth that would shatter James's empire. The ballroom of Hampton Mansion was a pressure cooker, the air thick with anticipation as Emily Harper's words, "I'm here to end it," hung like a guillotine over James Caldwell's head. The crowd of Hampton's elite, once gleeful in their mockery, now stood frozen, their champagne glasses forgotten, their eyes darting between Emily's serene defiance and James's unraveling composure. Her emerald gown shimmered like a war banner, the sapphire locket at her throat a ticking bomb. She turned James's cruel stage into her own, and the billionaire's empire was teetering on the edge of collapse. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of doubt that drowned out the string quartet in the corner. Emily took a slow, deliberate breath, her gaze never leaving James, and prepared to detonate the truth that would shatter his world. "And what?" James barked, his voice a mix of bravado and desperation. He stepped forward, trying to reclaim the spotlight, his tailored suit now seeming too tight, his forehead glistening with sweat. "You're a housekeeper with a borrowed dress and a fairy tale. This is absurd." His laugh was forced, a brittle sound that cracked under the weight of the room's scrutiny. But the guests weren't laughing anymore. Claire Winston clutched her diamond choker, her smirk replaced by a frown. Lauren Pierce, twirling her pearls nervously, whispered to a nearby tycoon, "What if she's not lying?" The influencer filming the scene, her phone trembling, narrated breathlessly to her thousands of followers, "This is unreal, something big's about to drop." Emily raised a hand, silencing the murmurs with the authority of someone born to command. "A fairy tale?" she said, her voice clear and cutting, each word a stone in the foundation of her truth. "No, James. This is history, our history. And you can't rewrite it anymore." She reached for the sapphire locket, her fingers tracing the Caldwell crest etched into its surface. The crowd leaned in, mesmerized, as she unclasped it and held it aloft, its blue gem catching the chandelier's light like a star. "This locket," she declared, "was my mother's. A gift from your father, William Caldwell. My father." The room erupted in gasps, a tidal wave of shock that rippled from the front row to the back. James staggered, his glass slipping from his hand and shattering on the marble floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "That's impossible," he roared, but his voice was unsteady, his eyes wild with panic. The guests turned to him, their expressions shifting from amusement to suspicion. Emily pressed forward, her voice rising with a righteous fury that filled the ballroom. "Impossible? Or inconvenient? You knew, James. You knew Clara Harper was William's love, that I was his daughter. And you buried us to steal what was ours." Flashbacks flooded Emily's mind, vivid and searing. She saw her mother Clara at a grand piano, her fingers dancing over the keys as William watched, entranced, in a ballroom much like this one. Their love had been a secret, hidden from the Caldwell family's rigid traditions, but it had birthed Emily, a child of passion, not privilege. When Clara died, William vowed to protect Emily, to share his fortune with her. But James, his ambitious son, saw her as a threat. After William's death, James had erased Clara's name, sold their home, and left Emily and her mother's memory in ruins. She'd been 12, alone, forced to claw her way through a world that no longer recognized her. Clara Harper was a nobody. James shouted, his face flushed, his hands shaking. "You're making this up to scam me." But his denial sounded hollow, and the crowd wasn't buying it. Emily's eyes blazed, her voice dropping to a lethal calm. "A nobody? She was the woman your father loved more than your mother's fortune. And I'm the daughter he wanted to protect." She held the locket higher, turning it so the crest faced James. "This is the Caldwell seal. You've seen it on your family's rings, your father's cufflinks. Tell me, James, how does a housekeeper get this?" The question was a trap, and James stumbled into it. "You stole it." He spat, but the accusation rang false, and he knew it. The guests murmured, their phones capturing every word, every flinch. Lauren Pierce whispered to Claire, "That locket. I've seen it in old Caldwell photos." Claire's face paled, her confidence crumbling. The influencer's feed exploded with comments, "She's his sister? This is insane." Emily seized the moment, stepping closer to James, her voice a whip. "Stole it? Or inherited it? You can't lie your way out of blood, James. I'm Emily Harper Caldwell, your half-sister, and you've spent 20 years pretending I don't exist." The word half-sister hit like a thunderclap, the room exploding in muffled exclamations. James's wife Sarah, who'd been watching from the sidelines, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "James, what is she talking about?" she demanded, her voice trembling. He turned to her, his eyes pleading, but no words came. The crowd parted, giving Emily the floor, their earlier mockery replaced by a stunned reverence. She continued, relentless. "You didn't just erase me, James. You sold my mother's home, cut off our allowance, and left me to scrape by while you built this empire on my father's stolen legacy. But tonight that ends." James lunged forward, his face contorted with rage. "You have no proof," he screamed, his voice cracking. "This is a con." But his desperation only fueled the crowd's doubt. Emily's smile was cold, unyielding. "Proof?" she said, her tone dripping with certainty. "Oh, I brought that too." She reached into her clutch, pulling out a folded document, a faded letter in William's handwriting, sealed with the Caldwell crest. The crowd leaned in, breathless, as she held it up. "This is my father's promise to me," she said, her voice breaking with emotion for the first time. "And it's just the beginning." The ballroom seemed to spin, the walls closing in on James as Emily's truth took root. The influencer's phone shook, her followers flooding the chat. "She's about to destroy him." Claire and Lauren backed away, their faces ashen, realizing they'd bet on the wrong horse. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, her world unraveling. Emily stood tall, the locket in one hand, the letter in the other, a warrior armed with truth. She'd come to James's gala as a housekeeper, but she'd leave as the heir he tried to erase. And the night was far from over. The Hampton Mansion ballroom is electric, Emily Harper Caldwell's revelation still reverberating like a shockwave. James Caldwell stumbles, his empire cracking under her truth. The crowd's eyes are glued to her, phones capturing every heartbeat of this unraveling scandal. Suddenly, the screen freezes on Emily's fierce gaze, her sapphire locket gleaming. Voiceover cuts in, urgent and commanding. "If Emily's courage to expose a billionaire's lies has you hooked, hit that subscribe button now. Join us to uncover the explosive evidence that'll bring this house of cards down. Don't miss the justice that's coming. Click subscribe and stay with us." The frame fades back to Emily, unyielding, ready to strike. The Hampton Mansion ballroom was a cauldron of chaos, the air thick with shock and disbelief as Emily Harper Caldwell's declaration of her true identity, William Caldwell's daughter, James's half-sister, sank into the stunned crowd. The sapphire locket in her hand and her father's letter, clutched like a weapon, had turned James's gala into a battlefield. His face was a mask of panic, his empire teetering as the elite of the Hamptons watched, their earlier mockery replaced by a mix of awe and dread. Emily stood unwavering, her emerald gown a beacon of defiance, ready to deliver the final blow. The stage was set for a reckoning, and the truth was about to burn James's world to the ground. Emily's eyes locked onto James, her voice steady but laced with a fury that made the chandeliers seem to tremble. "You thought you could erase me, James," she said, her words cutting through the murmurs. "But you didn't just steal my inheritance, you stole my father's life." The accusation landed like a thunderbolt, and the crowd gasped, phones raised higher, capturing every second of the unfolding drama. James lurched forward, his voice hoarse with desperation. "That's a lie," he shouted, his hands flailing. "You're insane. My father died of a heart attack." But his words were drowned by the weight of Emily's presence, her calm authority commanding the room. She raised a hand, silencing him, and turned to the crowd. "I didn't come here alone," she said, her tone deliberate, each syllable a nail in James's coffin. She gestured to the ballroom's entrance, where three figures emerged from the shadows, their arrival sending a ripple of tension through the guests. The first was Diane Morrison, a renowned investigative journalist with a reputation for exposing corruption, her notepad in hand, eyes sharp. The second was David Lee, a steely estate lawyer, his briefcase bulging with documents. The third was Dr. Richard Hamilton, the Caldwell family's former physician, his face pale but resolute, carrying a burden he'd buried for decades. The crowd parted, their whispers crescendoing into a roar of anticipation. Diane stepped forward, her voice clear and commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to hear will change the Caldwell legacy forever," she announced, her words broadcast live to her network's audience. She nodded to Dr. Hamilton, who approached a microphone stand, his hands trembling but his resolve unbroken. 20 years ago, he began, his voice cracking, "I was coerced into falsifying William Caldwell's death certificate. He didn't die of a heart attack. He was poisoned, slowly, deliberately, with arsenic. The room exploded in muffled cries, guests clutching each other, their faces a gallery of horror. Sarah, James's wife, staggered, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. James lunged toward Hamilton, his face contorted with rage. "You're a liar," he screamed, but security guards, alerted by Emily's team, restrained him, their grips firm. Hamilton continued, his voice steadier now, fueled by years of guilt. William discovered James was embezzling millions from the family company. He was rewriting his will to include Emily and her mother, Clara Harper, and planned to report James to the authorities. That's when he started getting sick. Unexplained fatigue, nausea, hair loss. I found arsenic in his blood, but James threatened my career, my family. I stayed silent. His head bowed, tears falling as the crowd absorbed the gravity of his confession. Diane took the stage, her presence commanding. "We have evidence," she said, connecting her laptop to the ballroom's projector. A grainy audio file played, James's voice unmistakable, chilling the room. "Hamilton, you keep your mouth shut about my father's blood work or I'll ruin you. That woman and her brat get nothing." The recording was a dagger, and James's face drained of color, his body slumping as if physically struck. Diane clicked through documents, bank transfers showing $250,000 paid to Hamilton days after William's death, marked consulting fees, forged financial records hiding James's theft, and a lab report confirming arsenic in preserved samples from William's autopsy, tested last week by an independent lab. David Lee stepped forward, his voice calm but unyielding. "These documents prove James not only murdered his father but defrauded Emily of her rightful inheritance," he said, holding up a copy of William's original will, which named Emily as a co-heir. "Under New York law, assets obtained through criminal means can be redistributed. Emily is entitled to half of Caldwell Enterprises, valued at $150 million. The crowd gasped, the number staggering, but it was the moral weight that hit hardest. Claire Winston, her diamond choker now a noose, whispered to Lauren Pierce, "My God, he's a monster." Lauren, pale, could only nod, her pearls slipping through trembling fingers. James collapsed into a chair, his hands covering his face, his empire crumbling in real time. "It's a setup," he cried, but his voice was a broken whisper, drowned by the crowd's murmurs and the relentless evidence. Emily stepped closer, her eyes burning with a mix of pain and triumph. "You killed our father, James," she said, her voice trembling for the first time, raw with grief. "You took his life, my home, my future. For 20 years I cleaned your floors, your lies, your guilt. But no more." Her words were a requiem, and the crowd fell silent, some wiping tears, others turning away from James as if he were contagious. Sarah approached Emily, her face streaked with mascara, her voice barely audible. "Did you know all this time?" she asked, her eyes searching for answers. Emily nodded, her expression softening. "I had to wait to gather proof to make sure he couldn't escape justice." Sarah turned to James, her voice breaking. "You destroyed us." She walked away, leaving him alone, a king dethroned. The influencer's phone shook, her live feed flooded with comments. "Justice is served. Emily's a hero." Diane Morrison addressed the crowd, her voice resolute. "This is live on every major network. James Caldwell will face charges for murder, fraud, and embezzlement. The truth is out." Emily stood at the center of the storm, her locket glinting, her father's letter now a symbol of victory. The ballroom, once a stage for her humiliation, was now a monument to her justice. James's head hung low, his arrogance shattered, but Emily's gaze was fixed on the future. She'd exposed his crimes, but the battle wasn't over. The crowd watched, breathless, as she prepared to deliver one final blow, a promise that the Caldwell legacy would never be the same. The Hampton Mansion ballroom was a war zone of shattered illusions, James Caldwell's empire reduced to rubble by Emily Harper Caldwell's unrelenting truth. The air buzzed with the fallout of Dr. Hamilton's confession and Diane Morrison's damning evidence. James had poisoned his father, William, to secure a fortune that wasn't fully his. Emily stood tall, her emerald gown a symbol of her reclaimed legacy, the sapphire locket at her throat glinting like a battle-won trophy. The crowd, once mocking, now watched in stunned silence, their phones trembling as they recorded the unraveling of a titan. But the storm wasn't over. As the ballroom doors burst open, a swarm of reporters and camera crews flooded in, their lights blinding, their voices a cacophony of hunger for the scandal of the century. Emily turned to face the onslaught, her posture unyielding, her eyes blazing with purpose. The reporters surged forward, microphones thrusting toward her like spears. "Miss Harper, is it true you're William Caldwell's daughter?" One shouted. "Did James Caldwell confess?" Another demanded. Flashbulbs popped, casting stark shadows across the marble floor. James, slumped in a chair, tried to rise, his face a mask of desperation. "Get them out!" he yelled, his voice cracking, but the security guards, now loyal to the unfolding truth, blocked his path. Emily raised a hand, silencing the chaos with a single gesture, her presence commanding the room like a queen reclaiming her throne. She stepped toward James, the cameras tracking her every move, broadcasting live to millions. "You thought you could humiliate me, James?" she said, her voice steady but searing, each word a public indictment. "You invited me here to break me, but now the world sees you for what you are, a thief, a liar, a murderer." The crowd gasped, the reporters scribbling furiously, their feeds exploding with real-time reactions. James lunged forward, his hands clawing the air. "You're ruining me," he screamed, his face contorted, sweat dripping from his brow. But Emily didn't flinch. "You ruined yourself," she countered, her tone icy, "the moment you chose greed over family." Diane Morrison stepped beside Emily, her voice cutting through the frenzy. "This is live on CNN, NBC, and every major outlet," she announced, her laptop projecting the broadcast onto the ballroom screen. Clips of James's recorded threats and Hamilton's confession played in a loop, each frame tightening the noose around him. Claire Winston and Lauren Pierce, their faces ashen, slipped toward the exits, their designer heels clicking in retreat, but reporters blocked their path, shouting, "Did you know about the murder?" Their silence was damning, their socialite facades crumbling under the weight of complicity. Emily faced the cameras, her gaze piercing. "This isn't just my story," she said, her voice rising with conviction. "It's for every person who's been erased, silenced, or stepped on by people like him." The crowd murmured in awe, some nodding, others wiping tears. James, cornered, sank back into his chair, his hands covering his face, a broken man exposed to the world. The media frenzy intensified, but Emily stood as its eye, calm and resolute, her victory not just personal but universal. The Hamptons would never forget this night, and neither would the world watching. The Hampton Mansion ballroom, once a glittering shrine to wealth, now felt like a courtroom as the weight of Emily Harper Caldwell's justice settled over the stunned crowd. The media's cameras still flashed, their live feeds beaming James Caldwell's downfall to the world, but a new sound cut through the chaos, sirens sharp and relentless, growing louder outside the mansion's towering windows. Emily stood at the center, her emerald gown radiant, the sapphire locket a silent testament to her victory. James, slumped in a velvet chair, was a shadow of the billionaire who'd mocked her hours ago, his face buried in trembling hands. The elite of the Hamptons, their champagne forgotten, watched in a mix of horror and reverence as the consequences of James's crimes crashed down. Police officers stormed through the ballroom doors, their badges glinting under the chandeliers, their boots echoing on the marble floor. "James Caldwell, you're under arrest for murder, fraud, and embezzlement," the lead officer declared, his voice a hammer. James lurched to his feet, his eyes wild, desperation twisting his features. "This is a mistake," he screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the crowd's murmurs and the click of handcuffs snapping around his wrists. The officers pulled him toward the exit, his tailored suit now wrinkled, his arrogance stripped bare. The influencer filming nearby gasped into her phone, "He's done for," as her followers flooded the chat with fire emojis and cries of justice. Sarah, James's wife, stood frozen near a gilded column, her face streaked with mascara, her hands clutching her pearl clutch as if it could anchor her crumbling world. She stepped toward Emily, her voice barely a whisper. "How could you do this to us?" she asked, her eyes pleading for mercy. Emily's expression softened, but her resolve held firm. "I didn't do this, Sarah," she said, her voice steady but tinged with sorrow. "James did. He chose to kill, to lie, to destroy. I only brought the truth." Sarah's shoulders shook and she turned away, unable to face the man she called her husband, now a criminal led away in disgrace. Emily turned to the crowd, her presence commanding silence. "This isn't about revenge," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "It's about justice, for my father, for me, for everyone who's been crushed by men like James who think money buys immunity." Her words struck like lightning, and the guests shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their gazes. Claire Winston, her diamond choker glinting dully, approached hesitantly, her voice small. "Emily, we didn't know. I'm sorry." Emily's eyes narrowed, her smile cold. "You didn't know because you didn't care, Claire," she said, her tone sharp. "You laughed when you thought I was nothing. Don't expect my friendship now." Claire flinched, retreating into the crowd, her face burning with shame. Lauren Pierce, clutching her pearls, followed, her earlier venom replaced by silence. The police escorted James through the ballroom, his head bowed, the same path where he'd planned to parade Emily's humiliation. Guests parted, some whispering, others turning away, their alliances shifting like sand. Diane Morrison, still at the projector, announced, "James faces life in prison. The Caldwell fortune will be audited, and Emily's inheritance restored." The crowd murmured, the scale of the scandal sinking in. Emily stood alone, her locket catching the light, her heart heavy but unbowed. She toppled a giant, but the cost, years of pain, a family fractured, lingered in her eyes. As James disappeared into the night, the sirens fading, the ballroom felt both empty and alive, a monument to a truth that could no longer be buried. Emily's fight had rewritten the Caldwell legacy, and the world would never see her as just a housekeeper again. The echo of sirens faded into the Hamptons' night, leaving Hampton Mansion steeped in a surreal quiet, its opulence now a hollow backdrop to the seismic shift Emily Harper Caldwell had unleashed. 6 months later, the mansion's grandeur had been transformed, its cold marble softened by vibrant murals painted by local artists, its once exclusive halls now open to community events. Emily, now 33, stood in the renovated boardroom of Caldwell Enterprises, no longer a housekeeper but the rightful CEO, her emerald gown replaced by a sharp blazer, the sapphire locket still at her throat, a reminder of her father's love and her hard-won justice. The company, once a monument to James's greed, was now a beacon of fairness. Emily had slashed executive bonuses to fund fair wages, promoted janitors to managers based on merit, and launched a foundation for women escaping abuse, inspired by her mother Clara's resilience. In a sunlit office, she reviewed reports showing a 50% profit surge, proof that dignity drove productivity. Outside, employees laughed in a garden she'd built, their children playing near a fountain dedicated to William Caldwell. Emily's vision had turned a toxic empire into a community. At home, in a modest Hamptons cottage, Emily knelt beside a young girl, Mia, whom she'd recently fostered. Mia's shy smile mirrored Emily's own at 12, when loss had defined her. "You're safe now," Emily whispered, helping Mia with a math worksheet, her heart swelling with purpose. Later, at a scholarship ceremony, Emily handed awards to employees' children, her voice warm. "This is what family means, lifting each other up." The crowd cheered, their applause a stark contrast to the cruel laughter of the gala night. Yet shadows lingered. Emily received a letter from Sarah, now divorced and living quietly in Vermont. "You gave my children a chance to heal," Sarah wrote, despite James's sins. Emily kept it in a drawer, a reminder that justice could mend as well as break. As she gazed out her office window, the Hamptons skyline sparkling, Emily felt a peace she hadn't known in 20 years. She'd rebuilt not just a company but a legacy, one that honored her father and empowered the invisible. The sun rose over the Hamptons, casting golden light on Hampton Mansion, now a symbol of hope rather than hubris. Emily Harper Caldwell stood on its balcony, her silhouette framed against the dawn, the sapphire locket catching the first rays. The camera pulled back, revealing a bustling community center below. Children laughing, workers collaborating, a far cry from the elitist gala that had once defined this place. A voiceover, warm and resolute, began. Emily Harper Caldwell was invited to a gala to be broken, but she rose as an heir, a warrior, a builder. Her story isn't just about justice, it's about what we can become when we refuse to be defined by others. The screen flashed through moments, Emily's defiant entrance, her unmasking of James's crimes, the handcuffs snapping around his wrists, and her quiet moments with Mia, fostering hope. Emily taught us 3 lessons, the voiceover continued. First, resilience turns pain into power. Despite loss, she rebuilt her life, proving adversity is a forge, not a grave. Second, dignity is earned, not bought. No bank account can match the strength of standing tall. Third, justice isn't just for you, it's for everyone silenced by power. Emily's fight lifted countless others, showing one voice can change the world. The camera zoomed in on Emily's face, her eyes bright with quiet strength. "What's your fight?" The voiceover asked, its tone urgent, inspiring. Maybe it's speaking up at work, supporting a friend, or chasing a dream others dismiss. Emily's story reminds us, you are enough and your truth matters. The screen shifted to a montage of Caldwell Enterprises' new initiatives, scholarships, shelters, community gardens, each frame pulsing with hope. "This isn't the end," the voiceover declared. "It's a beginning, for Emily, for the Hamptons, for you." The The tone shifted, electrifying. If Emily's triumph over a billionaire's lies lit a fire in you, hit that subscribe button right now. The voiceover urged, the screen flashing with a vibrant call-to-action graphic. Join our community to discover more stories of courage and change. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Let's spread the power of truth. And tell us in the comments, how will you stand up for what's right? Your story could inspire the next Emily. The camera panned to a tablet showing a new video thumbnail, From Rags to Revolution, Another Underdog's Rise. As the music swelled, upbeat and triumphant, the voiceover concluded, Emily didn't just reclaim her legacy, she redefined it, proving that the most dangerous person is the one others underestimate. Subscribe, share, and let's keep building a world where justice wins. The final shot lingered on Emily, walking through the garden with Mia, their laughter blending with the morning breeze. The screen faded to black, a single line appearing, Your worth is limitless. Fight for it.